Good day or good evening. Welcome to the 10th episode of Creation, Genesis, and Origins. My co-host Ken Miller is with me. In the episodes preceding, we have examined evidence that shows clearly that Adam and his generations fit into a historical time and place. The time is approximately 7,000 years ago in the region the Hebrews called Shinar in the Old Testament that we know as Sumer, a land associated with the Sumerians who lived in that region for roughly 2,000 years, biblically corresponding approximately to the time from Adam to Abraham, a family of non-Sumerians that have been called Akkadians in history books.
From our vantage point, looking back at the history of the ancient Near East and also knowing the broader picture of human history that extends back hundreds of thousands of years, we're in a position to be well aware that Adam's family of descendants were never alone or isolated in a world that, by that point, contained millions of human beings scattered over the globe.
Even in Mesopotamia, our biblical family was surrounded from the beginning by Akkadians and then Sumerians, so they had to know they were not alone in the world. Yet the Genesis account and even the rest of the Old Testament reveals scant evidence of that, even though it was an inescapable fact of their daily lives that they were influenced by another culture that had different habits, values, laws, language, and ethnic differences.
This is the Standard of Ur, an 18-inch long banner that dates back between 2600 and 2500 BC. One side depicts Sumerians at peace, and the other side shows the Sumerians at war. Note the use of uniforms, body armor, horses, and chariots.
This scene depicts a Sumerian priest receiving an offering from an Akkadian subject. Note the differences that we also see in other examples of Sumerian art and artifacts. The Sumerian priest is bald and clean-shaven. Large ears and noses are typical Sumerian characteristics. The eyes appear to be accentuated with makeup. They are always shirtless. Here, an Akkadian is bringing a ram for sacrifice. By contrast, the Akkadian has a smaller nose, long hair, and beard.
The point is that what is obvious to us had to be obvious to them. Yet Genesis is written almost entirely from the point of view of Adam's people, almost as if there were no other people around them or in their vicinity.
Origin's issues would have been a lot easier to solve had the Hebrew writers included some information about their neighbors. Nevertheless, they did leave clues, a trail of breadcrumbs, so to speak, that have been generally overlooked by Bible translators and not recognized by commentators and critics who've tried to interpret Old Testament scripture and make sense of it all.
Knowing what we now know with the advantage of 20/20 hindsight and what Semites, Israelites, and Hebrews must have known, we can seek out the clues and tidbits that have been overlooked, unrecognized, and misunderstood for many centuries.
The King James Version of the Bible dates to 1611, and although newer versions have been produced and copyrighted in the last 400 years, nevertheless, the King James Bible established the initial standard and a pattern for subsequent translations, such that some of the mistakes in understanding then were grandfathered and incorporated in modern versions. Here we will concentrate on what the original authors knew and what they wrote in Hebrew, and how badly it has been understood.
Due to a lack of knowledge of anthropology in the 1600s, an absence of consistency arises when man and Adam appear in Scripture, and the translation can deviate arbitrarily from the original Hebrew.
It is significant that the original Hebrew authors used two separate Hebrew words for man in the Genesis text and in the rest of the Old Testament, Adam and Ish. Although Adam at times can be used in the sense of mankind, there are numerous instances where it should have been translated Adam initially in Genesis and then Adamite or Semite in subsequent passages after his death, but in any case understood as a nation directly in Adam's line of descent. This would just be the same as Israel. It is the man previously called Jacob until his death, and then Israel refers to the nation thereafter. But the translators did not recognize the possibility there could be non-Adamic populations in the world. So they labored as best they could with what they had to appear to them as contradictions that still remain in the translations we use to this day.
Writing in 1864, Dominic McCausland reasoned, the words Adam and Ish are clearly different in meaning, and to use them indiscriminately as having the same signification tends obviously to obscure the true import and significance of the scripture text. Had the translation been literal, the sense of the sacred record would have been more readily discovered, and the reader would recognize at a glance that the history which he has conceived to be a history of the origin of all mankind is simply a record of the creation of the Adam, the last and not the first of created men, and a history of his lineal descendants.
When the King James Version was translated, a certain bias toward what was commonly believed, that all of humanity sprang from Adam, led to confusing translations pertaining to the personage of Adam and his lineage, Adam versus mankind in general, Ish. Even more confusing, words of convenience were substituted where Adam and Ish are contained in the same sentence. For example, Psalm 62:9 in the King James Version begins, "Surely men of low degree, Beni Adam, are vanity, and men of high degree, Beni Ish, are a lie." The NIV says, "Low-born men are but a breath, the high-born are but a lie." Whereas it could have been stated, faithful to the Hebrew, a breath are the sons of Adam, a lie are the sons of mankind. Now it means something. The psalmist is regarding those in the Adamic line in a positive light and casting a negative light on Gentiles. Yet he continues, "If weighed on a balance, they are nothing. Together they are only a breath." Finally, after thousands of years, we now know what the psalmist, in this case David, was telling us. But to do that, we have to know what David knew. Sons of Adam have a different chain of ancestry than do the sons of generic man.
In Isaiah 2:9, do we see the Adamite or Semite bow down and the non-Adamite or Gentile humble himself? No. We see instead, and the mean man, Adam, bows down, and the great man, Ish, humbles himself.
This same pattern is repeated in Isaiah 31:8, where the term for generic man, Ish, becomes a mighty man, while Adam is somehow a mean man. So, due to a sanitizing translation process, even a prophet can have difficulty getting his message out. Here in the following verses, the original translation is followed by its meaning, knowing full well that the original authors were aware of the difference and used their words carefully and with an intended meaning that eluded the King James translators completely. Modern Bible translations, not having any better ideas, simply followed along, perpetuating the errors.